The floor is yours, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Good evening. This is the City of Morro Bay City Council special meeting. It is Wednesday, June 9th, 2021. It is 5 p.m. and this meeting is being held via teleconference. I'll go ahead and ask the clerk if she'll establish a quorum for tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Addis? Here. Councilmember Barton? Here. Councilmember Davis?
I am present.
Councilmember Heller?
Here.
And Mayor Heading?
And present. We do have a quorum and I will call the meeting to order, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention to you all that you should be wearing your blue for the Morro Bay High School graduation tonight. What a year it must have been for these kids, having to go through all that they did with this pandemic. And so, Councilmember Addis, thank you for your great sign behind you. Happy graduation, Morro Bay Pirates. I believe over 150 kids will be graduating tonight, and what an exciting time in their lives to actually be able to have a graduation this year, to be outside and have family members present. And so on behalf of the Morro Bay City Council, we just want to wish all of our graduates the very best as they continue on in whatever they are going to do in life. And we just want you to know how proud we are of you, young people, for what you've endured this year and gone through. And we look forward to the character building that has occurred and what it will bring back to this community in the future. So happy graduation, Pirates. With that, we do have a quorum. I've called the meeting to order. This is a special meeting this evening. Pursuant to Section 3 of Executive Order number N29-20, issued by Governor Newsom on March 17, 2020, this meeting will be conducted telephonically through Zoom and broadcast live on cable channel 20 and streamed on the city website. Please be advised that pursuant to the executive order and to ensure the health and safety of the public by limiting human contact that could spread the COVID-19 virus, the Veterans Hall will not be open for this meeting this evening. And when I do ask for public comment, we will go ahead and project on the screen how you can access that, either through the Zoom link or by calling in directly. Be sure to use the raise hand option so that you can be recognized and called on for public comment when it occurs. So this is now public comment. I'm calling for public comment on tonight's agenda. This is a special meeting. Our agenda item is a binding memorandum of understanding agreement between the City of Morro Bay and Vistra Corporation to pursue necessary WRF easements for $1, settle eminent domain lawsuit, amend encumbrance on development of shuttered power plant site, and address possible development. And with that, I am going to go ahead and open up public comment. Again, this is public comment for items on tonight's agenda only. Thank you, Zeke. I'll go ahead and open up public comment and ask if we have anybody in the queue that would like to speak.
Yes, sir. The first speaker is Jane Heath.
Okay.
Jane, you are allowed to talk.
Welcome, Jane.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to address you. I appreciate the staff report. I know they put a lot of work into that, and they put a lot of information in quite clearly, and I appreciate the clarity. But I would like to ask the council, as you consider the MOU tonight, to carefully consider the term of the proposal that if the demolition of the stacks and building do not occur by 2033, that a $3 million payment would be owed to the city. Since the cost to demolish and clean the site has been estimated at over $50 million, it seems there's insufficient incentive for the owner to actually do that work rather than just wait out the time and make the payment. There's a significant advantage to Morro Bay if both the stacks and the building are dealt with, since they are the sort of albatross that has kind of kept us from going forward with anything at this site. So I would please consider negotiating a more appropriate incentive so that the likelihood of completing the demolition is increased. There's a significant advantage to the city in this proposed agreement, not least to obtain the important easement without the insecurity of litigation. But it's really important that the right deal be made. We have a wonderful opportunity here. I think there is some exciting prospects for finally doing something with this very important piece of property. I know this is just the first step. I'm not going to address, whether the stack should or should not be removed. That's just not really an issue from my view, but it is a really important issue that if we're going to enter into an MOU with Vistra, that we make sure it's the right deal for the city. So I please ask you to look at that monetary term very carefully and consider whether there's a better deal out there for the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. Zeke, next public comment, please.
At this time, there is nobody else with their hand raised. I would like to remind people if they want to raise their hand, and they can hit the raise hand feature, or if they're on a dial-in, they could hit *9 or *6. I'm sorry.
*9, yes. And that's displayed on the screen. I'll just give it a few seconds to see if anybody else will be calling in tonight. Any other callers, Zeke?
Yes, sir. We just a minute. And we've lost them. Sorry.
Okay. Any raised hands or other callers?
Not at this time.
All right. Well, with that, I will go ahead and...
Excuse me, sir. Somebody just raised their hand again.
All right, sure. I'll keep public comment open,
Okay,
give people the chance. Go ahead, Zeke.
All right. Norm Williams, you are able to talk.
Welcome, Norm.
Norm, you have to unmute your phone.
Norm, are you with us?
They may be having trouble. I'm going to ask them to unmute their phone.
Do we have anybody else in the queue?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Is this you, Norm?
Yes, it is, finally.
Yes, welcome. Yes, welcome.
Sorry about that. Technology
Go ahead, please.
betrays me.
No worries.
Okay, the main thing I'm going to elaborate on is if you are going to make a deal, I know they keep talking about the $450,000 that we are going to get from the property taxes. And of course, the county of San Luis Obispo is going to get the bulk of the property tax on this. Yet we're the ones that are incurring the risk of the large power plant. What I'm saying is that I understand the property taxes, that's one venue, but when we had the old power plant, we got a lot more money for helping the generation of electricity throughout the state. And I think we could get a lot better deal. I think we should get the $450,000 just to me that's nothing. I mean, that covers maybe a few pensions. So I just think that's not a good part of the deal. The other thing is, if we are able to develop the plant, or we do go through with this deal and we have that, the shuttered plant site is going to be reopened, is going to be demolished, and the stacks are going to come down. We'd like that land protected. We wouldn't want to see the battery plant expanded into that area. We'd like that to be open space, maybe a park or something, because that's one of the first things people would see is they take the boardwalk and they're going down towards the rock. It would enhance the value of the city as far as future tourism goes. So that's something that is very important. And finally, I find it kind of interesting. We were kind of scared. We were really scared of lawsuits when we had some people objecting to where we were going to put the sewer plant originally, some neighbors, and we said, "Oh no, we're going to go up the 41 corridor." And boy, were we really scared of that. And so we went ahead and backed down and moved it. Well, here we are in another situation where we're worried about lawsuits and are backing down. And I think, quite frankly, we've got the power of eminent domain. I think we would be in good shape on this. I think we could pursue this, and if nothing else, get a lot better deal from Vistra. Those are my comments. I just want you to really look at those 3 points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norm. Zeke, do we have anybody else in the queue for public comment?
No, sir, not at this time.
Okay. Thank you. I will go ahead and close public comment, bring it back to council. Council, again, just a couple of notes in opening up. This evening, we are addressing the items, obviously, specifically within the staff report, the binding memorandum of understanding as noted in the agenda packet. We are not vetting and or approving or even considering a battery project. That is a process that Vistra has gone through in order to move that forward. They have submitted plans to the city. And I just want to remind the public and council that that project specifically will go through the usual process of staff evaluation, CEQA review, and also the review by Planning Commission, as well as public hearings, both at Planning Commission and the City Council. So tonight, again, we're not vetting that. We've had a number of educational sessions that Vistra has presented to the city with regard to the battery project that they're proposing. And one was at one of our city council meetings. If anybody's interested in looking at that in the public, that is on the city website and can be viewed at any time. In addition to that, a number of individuals have hosted forums, including the chamber, Councilmember Addis and myself, where Vista has presented information regarding their proposal and their concept. Again, just to be clear tonight, this is not about approving or vetting a battery project. That is going through the usual city process. And thank you for allowing me to just remind us of what we're here for this evening. With that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Collins to make his presentation. Thank you, Scott, for the excellent staff report. Very comprehensive, and I appreciate all that you and your staff have done to bring this to us.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members, members of the community who spoke tonight, and those watching from home. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I haven't done this in a while, so bear with me. Let's go here. Visible? You can see it okay? I hope.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Okay, so I do have a brief PowerPoint presentation and really want to make sure we provide plenty of time for council questions and discussion. So title of the PowerPoint is Unlocking Opportunities for Our Community, and that's ultimately how the MOU looks to do both for the city and for Vistra Corp. The staff recommendation for council is to approve and authorize the mayor to execute the binding memorandum of understanding agreement between the city and Vistra Corp, which purchases necessary water reclamation facility easements for $1, settles eminent domain lawsuit, and amends encumbrances on development of the shuttered Morro Bay power plant site and addresses possible future redevelopment of that site. So before jumping into the agreement, just a few things that I wanted to cover regarding the power plant site, which you can see here. The staff report goes into a bit more detail discussing some of the challenges inherent with the plant site. Important to remember that since the 1950s, all the way through the 2013, the primary use of this property was to run at the start outside an oil powered power plant and then a natural gas powered power plant. So there are a lot of remnants from that facility use on the property, including contaminants. Because PG&E owned and operated that power plant from the 50s up to 1998 when it sold to Duke Energy, prior to selling that property, they put a deed restriction on the entire site that prohibits the use of that facility other than for industrial use until contaminants could be addressed. And the California Department of Toxic Substance Control, or DTSC for short, will not allow use beyond industrial use until contaminants of concern are both evaluated and remediated. So that's an important consideration, that despite its amazing location and proximity to the waterfront and to the Pacific Ocean, there are a lot of environmental issues that would need to be addressed before it could be utilized for things that you would think would naturally fit in with the coastline location. The other issues at the site, and important to note, is we do have the existing turbine building, which was where the energy was created to be put on the grid and to power homes on the Central Coast and the Central Valley, and the 3 exhaust stacks. Those are primarily the main remaining structures for the old PG&E power site, with the exception of the substation in the back, which actually still belongs to PG&E, as that's still active as part of our overall grid in the state. But the turbine building and the stacks, have what some would say historical value, and others would say has the opposite. And beyond that, has contamination issues, asbestos and other things inside those facilities, which makes it very expensive to be reused, which is a challenge for anybody considering redevelopment. And last but not least, the city does have a current option with the Duke Energy agreement with the city, which has been carried forward to the current owners, Vistra Corp. We do have the ability in 2033, if the plant has not been torn down or repowered, that the city could purchase the site for $1. Of course, that sounds great from the outside looking in, when you look at the proximity to the ocean and all the potential reuses that could occur. But then when you remember the deed restrictions and the DTSC issues with contamination, and the fact that the buildings that remain contain asbestos and other contaminants, and a lot of expense related to those to be cleaned up, then it no longer seems like such a great deal for the city. We've heard that the remediation of the facilities and the site is anywhere from $30 million, and I've heard all the way up to $150 million to complete that work. So very, very expensive consideration. And when you factor that with the city's current general fund annual operation budget is about $15 million, that kind of gives you a sense of the city's ability to conduct those activities if we were to take over the site in 2033. So, a result of all of these issues, we've had a lot of interest, at least from the community side, and actually from potential developers since Dynegy took over the site in 2007 to repurpose this facility and this site. We've heard discussions about hotels, conference centers, museums, parks, using wave energy to power the grid, and a number of other potential redevelopment opportunities, including mixed use on that facility. And they all ran into these same issues. The $1 option for the city, which creates encumbrances and concern about uncertainty risk for a developer, the fact that those buildings really can't be repurposed without a massive investment, and then again, the contamination issues on the site has led to what we've seen, which is no activity. And that is the concern, is if nothing were to change, that's how it would be in perpetuity. So this agreement, in short, provides some opportunity for the city and for a future redevelopment. The immediate gain is that the city gets the easements that we need to complete the water reclamation facility project. It removes obstacles for reuse of the Morro Bay power plant site, creates opportunities if a battery project were to move forward to position the city as a leader sort of in the green energy field, considering that there may be offshore wind opportunities in Morro Bay as well in the future. And it provides a pathway to remove the shuttered Morro Bay power plant structures that remain, and provides a lot of opportunity for public engagement and discussion in the planning processes for future redevelopment of the site. So again, the easements, the city gains the easements for $1. We valued those at about $200,000. Vistra values at nearly $6 million. So there's a difference, of course, between our valuation and theirs, but it's a good deal nonetheless, whatever number you were to choose between those two numbers. It removes the obstacles for redevelopment, at least on the industrial level or industrial type of reuse. Again, we mentioned that the term that the city negotiated with Duke Energy many years ago, 2004, to take over the parcel if the power plant wasn't repowered or demolished by 2033. Sounds like a great deal, but it has precluded potential developers from reasonable ability to finance and develop a project. And again, that's why we haven't seen anything happen for so long. The proposed agreement with Vistra can yield the city significant benefits, and the $1 purchase option can be reasonably lifted and get the community a good deal at the same time. Again, as the mayor mentioned, we are not considering tonight a battery project, but that is ultimately what the Vistra Corp has submitted to our planning department for review. And it has to go through a lot of review before it gets there, but there is the potential in the future for creating sort of a green hub here in the city of Morro Bay. And there are significant needs in our state, considering that the drought is challenging the some of our hydro plants that feed the grid because water levels are dropping in those reservoirs, that we're going to need as much energy sources as possible and storage facilities as well to power the grid in the future. And there could be opportunities for community benefits, as the caller had mentioned, in the future for that, including property tax, but also potentially community benefits through a development agreement. The agreement also provides a pathway to remove the shuttered Morro Bay power plant structures. As you see in this photo, we have both the old turbine building and the 3 stacks. The agreement contemplates tear down of the turbine building that must occur before the end of calendar year 2027. The city has an option to put the stacks into that tear down date as well. We must provide that information or direction to Vistra before the end of calendar year 2022, and then they would be part of the teardown, or the city could choose to have those to remain standing. Regardless of what that decision is, whatever it is, they would have to tear down those facilities, or the city will gain $3 million from Vista Corp in 2028. As the mayor identified at the beginning of this meeting, or the beginning of this discussion, there is no consideration of a battery project or other future development tonight. You're making no decisions on those, but it is important to understand that if the battery project were to proceed forward, it would go through a significant environmental review, which is important considering concerns we've heard in the community about safety and about environmental impacts. That the CEQA process would, and the planning process would take into consideration those issues and vet those thoroughly with expertise, and then provide a report for not only staff, but the planning commission and the public to review, and then ultimately city council. And given that we are such close proximity to the ocean, there's a likelihood that the Coastal Commission would also need to review this project. So in thinking about not only the issue about stacks, whether they should come down or not, or the building, or a potential battery project, or what other kind of reuses could be used or conducted out on that land, there's some key criteria for community outreach that we think is important, given what we've heard in the community so far, and that's ensuring community safety and our quality of life, that we support a vibrant and diverse local economy. It contributes to not only the city's financial sustainability, but the environmental sustainability of our community. And overall, we balance both the benefits and impacts of a future development. And we consider local Native American heritage and cultural resources, particularly on the Morro Bay Power Plant site, and really truly do our best to engage our public in these important discussions, because this has been such an important component of not only our history, but will be of our future that this site represents, that we want to make sure our community is fully informed about the various trade-offs for different types of uses, what the benefits may be to our community, and that they provide meaningful input into that process for Planning Commission, Council, and other elected bodies to make decisions. So with that in mind, we are recommending that Council approve and authorize the mayor to execute the binding MOU agreement between the city and Bistro Corp., which purchases necessary wharf easements for $1, settles eminent domain lawsuit, amends encumbrances on the development of the shuttered Morro Bay Power Plant site, and addresses possible development in the future. Thank you, Mayor. Happy to answer any questions that Council may have.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate the overview. Again, the staff report, very comprehensive, and thanks again for your presentation tonight. With that, we'll go ahead and open it up for council questions of either a staff member, any staff member. Mr. Graham's available. Scott is here, and we also have Chris Niermeyer, our city attorney, regarding some of the legal issues that you may have questions about as well. So let's go ahead and find out if we have any questions. Councilmember Davis, sir, do you have questions?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Heller, sir, questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have some questions. Regarding the stacks, which I personally love and would love to keep, the deadline for making the decision, if I understand it correctly, is the end of the calendar year 2022, which seems really, really soon. What is the city planning, or how's the city planning to move forward with, to get community input and come to a decision as to whether or not the stacks will stay or go?
A great question, Councilmember Heller. We haven't formulated the specific plans that, obviously see the MOU as the first step. But we've obviously heard a lot of interest on folks who have strong feelings on both sides of keeping them or tearing them down, and that's a good thing. That we want to try to bring those folks into the conversation in a variety of ways. We anticipate we'll be able to be meeting in person again relatively soon, so there could be community forums at city facilities. We have the Polko tool, which can be used to limit the participation by people who actually live in Morro Bay and not those who are outside the community, although, of course, we care what our visitors say, but this is a decision about our community. So we could use that survey tool. And then ultimately, we would come to City Council in some form of a general business item in the future. I think between now and that point in time, which not the greatest at math, but I think that's about 18 months, I think we would be able to get a pretty good feel where the community's at. And part of that outreach is to help inform the community about what them coming up or down, taking them down would mean. And part of that's understanding what are the issues with the stacks, what would it cost to maintain them, would the city take ownership of them if they were left standing, what liability would be, what are contamination concerns, retrofitting to deal with future earthquakes. So those kind of issues would need to be addressed in the outreach, but ultimately we want to know kind of what our community wants. So I think we could accomplish that in that period of time.
Okay. We got some questions from the public. I'd like to just throw a couple of them out here. Let's see here. There's a question about what is the appraised value of the land absent mitigation costs? how might an alternate future to staff's recommendation play out if the city were to assume ownership of the parcel one day? Do we have any rough numbers on that?
Yes, we did have as part of the work to acquire the easements for the wharf project, we did have a appraisal done, and that was done in 2019, so I want to caveat with that. It's a couple years ago. But the number that came back as is with sort of what we understand about contamination in both of soil and groundwater does not affect the wharf project, that it was around $9 million at that time. And again, the $1 option trade for $3 million kind of gives you an idea of what that value is between what the MOU is and what the city's hired appraiser came back with on that property. As I mentioned during my presentation, if the city were to require the property in 2033, and the property kind of carried forward as is from today to that period of time, 12 years from now, the contamination issues would remain. Likely the structures that are out there would remain. And so we would, if we were to purchase that for $1, we would own all that. Would create some potential liability issues and challenges for the city. So that, how would the city kind of overcome the millions and millions of dollars to redevelop the property is a good question. I've done some research into brownfield redevelopment. Most of the grants that are available are more in the planning component phases, like up to a couple $100,000. I've seen some remediation grants in about $1 million or $2 million range. So that doesn't seem to equate to what we would need to do to repurpose the plant or the facility to be something other than what it stands as today. So those are some of the challenges that we found when doing research for this project or for this council item.
Okay. And then there was a question about the $3 million that we would get if the plant is not demolished by 2028, I believe. What assurance do we have that we would actually be able to collect that from Vistra if that should come to pass?
Good question. I will punt to the city attorney to take that one on. Thank you.
Sure. So the end result of the negotiations with Vistra was that we were getting what's considered to be one of the highest levels of security. The MOU provides for a letter of credit from a bank. And so basically we would be getting from a reputable bank an IOU for $3 million, and it would be in our name, and it would have in there the conditions for when we could draw upon the funds. So if the MOU is executed, then we get a letter of credit from a bank, and then it's out of Vistra's hands. It's between us and the bank on whether we draw down the money, and there's certain conditions where if they're met, we have the unconditional right to draw down the money. So a lot of thought was put into making sure that the funds would be available, and so that was the end result.
Okay. Let's see.
And to be clear, when I say it's an IOU from the bank, I mean that the bank's financial institution is obligated to pay the money if the conditions are met. And that's a lot more security than having just a commitment from a corporate entity to pay money. So it's a standard way to make sure that money is secure.
Okay. There's another question about assuming the council approves this MOU, does that give any kind of approval on the battery storage project that's being proposed, or does it have to go through all the normal processes, approval processes?
This MOU absolutely does not approve the battery project or any other potential development on the property. And if the battery project that is currently in the review process with City Hall were to get to the stage where permits would need to be considered by Planning Commission and then City Council, then public hearings would be held for that.
Okay. And then another question I think that the public has is, you know, why didn't we hear about this sooner? Are any of these things that we're talking about in this MOU, could these have been discussed in public or not?
Well, I think it would have prejudiced the city's negotiations if we had conducted negotiations in the open. You know, this MOU is the result of long negotiations with Vistra Corp, and my opinion is that it would certainly have prejudiced the city's ability to effectively negotiate if we had negotiated in public.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilmember Heller. Appreciate your questions. Councilmember Barton, do you have questions?
Not at the moment. The ones that Councilmember Heller brought up were the ones that were rattling around in my brain, and so I'm still mulling those over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Councilmember Addis, please, do you have questions?
No, I don't have any other questions at the moment. I do want to appreciate all the work that staff has put into this, and then also all of the questions, as well as folks with a variety of opinions that wrote into us about this issue today. I read through all of those comments, and I'm glad that those questions got vetted here this evening.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'll just ask a few questions as well. This would be for you, Chris, most likely, I think. With regard to the original Duke agreement that the city entered into a number of years ago, 9 or 10 or 8 or 9 years ago, was there an absolute requirement that the building and or stacks be removed or torn down?
No. The agreement that exists right now simply provides for a penalty if the stacks and the building are not torn down.
And the penalty was basically that the city would have the option to purchase or the property in its existing state for $1.
Yes. There's no obligation in the current agreement. The status quo has no obligation for the landowner to tear down anything. The penalty would be that if they don't do it by, it turns out, roughly 2033, then the city could purchase the entire property as is for $1. And the MOU, among other things, is basically substituting penalties. And now there's a penalty of paying the city $3 million through a letter of credit if it's not taken down by the end of 2027.
Okay, appreciate that. And if the city chose to do nothing at this point and continued under the Duke agreement, and then in 2033 made a decision to purchase the property, would all of the encumbrances regarding the restrictions, restrictive covenants on the property that currently exist with regard to PG&E remain in effect and be then the responsibility of the city to try to negotiate to basically change, if possible, to further develop the property?
Yes, the current deed restrictions run with the land, meaning that any future property owner, including the city of Morro Bay, would take on all the responsibilities of the current deed restrictions.
Okay. And is there any requirement that exists right now, absolutely, that would require the current owner or any future owner of what I'll call the Vistra property now to either develop or tear down any of the existing structures?
No.
So in essence, if we did nothing, then any owner at present could continue to do nothing for a long period of time if they chose to do that. I'm assuming.
Yes, the property right now sits in private hands, and that private property owner makes the ultimate decisions on whether to develop or not to develop, or to just let the property sit. And it's been sitting there since the original power plant went dark. So one can speculate what would happen if status quo maintains.
Got it. And a couple of other questions for you. With regard to the notion of a development agreement, I don't think perhaps our public may fully understand what a development agreement is. And so this MOU contemplates and basically indicates that we would enter into the process of negotiating a development agreement with Vistra. Could you outline for our community members exactly what that encompasses and what we might expect as a city out of that?
Sure. So what the agreement's referencing is a statutory development agreement, which is provided by California law as an option that developers, of large projects that take often many years to complete, and the city or county that they sit in to enter into, to provide certainty to the developer that the land use and the zoning remains the same throughout the entire process of the development. Otherwise, land use and zoning can change essentially until the rights to develop a current project vest. And the rights to develop a current project don't vest until certain conditions are met that for large projects often are years down the road. So developers are generally anxious to make sure that their right to continue the development vest as early as possible. And a development agreement basically provides them that guarantee. And in exchange, basically they provide some benefits to the city. Typical development agreements, just in general, either provide cash to a city, or they provide some other development like public improvements. Maybe they deed some land to the city. It's essentially something to be negotiated. So it's a creature of the California legislature in reaction to a problem that was perceived over the years of developers wanting to have certainty for their land use. And in exchange for getting that, they basically buy that certainty by providing benefits to the city. And it's all subject to negotiation. And to be clear, the MOU simply referencing the fact that both parties would expect, if we get to the point where a development agreement is available, that we would negotiate in good faith, but neither party has a commitment to doing that at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. With regard to the current restrictions imposed by PG&E, do we, and this could be for either Mr. Graham or Mr. Collins, do we have any estimates on the potential costs for remediation of the items that are contained within those deed restrictions?
Not a good number, other than it's in the tens of millions of dollars. We know the facility is in that range, just to tear down or to repurpose. But to address contamination in the tank farm areas or in other areas, to bring it to a higher level of use beyond industrial, the numbers would be significant. I've heard anywhere from 50 to 150 or 125 million, but I wouldn't base it on those numbers. That's just estimates that I've heard, but we know it's a lot of zeros for that.
And have you mentioned earlier potential costs for demolishing the stacks and building Can you repeat what that number is?
Again, we heard it, referring back to what staff had mentioned, I think back in 2013 or 14 when the plant was kind of officially decommissioned, was that it would be at least $30 million, if not more. But that was 7 years ago, so that number is probably much higher at this point.
I think it's important to note, too, in terms of potential costs for demolition, that there's not just the cost for the actual work of bringing down the building and the stacks. Then there's the question of the remediation, and there's different levels of remediation. So the cheapest, if you will, is to make a property suitable for industrial, and then that goes all the way up to the much more expensive remediation for residential use. So, any costs to bring down the building would include, what type of use was contemplated, and the remediation costs can vary depending upon the contemplated use. Right now, the deed restrictions provide for only industrial, and it's unclear, and really I don't think how anyone could know for sure, for example, what level of contamination is underneath the old power plant, because there's a power plant sitting there right now. But that's kind of a black box on how much the cost would be. We do know, of course, that this power plant, as City Manager Collins mentioned, was in existence for decades, and certainly operated for many, many years before modern environmental laws.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Mr. Collins, do you know of any federal programs and or state programs that potentially could provide dollars to the city if the city acquired the property for remediation and or tear down? Are there any major programs out there, or any thoughts that perhaps the city could get money to do the tear down if it acquired the property?
There definitely is federal support for planning of kind of master planning, if you will, or trying to get your arms wrapped around what it would actually take and to remediate or tear down older facilities. And then there's a little bigger pockets of money to actually take on that work. But as my research shows that those grants are in the $1 to $2 million range, which isn't insignificant, but it wouldn't get at the big dollar amounts that we would anticipate would be needed to take that site to the next level. And I think do you hear questions about well, how come the nuclear power plant has money set aside, and why did this plant have money set aside? And I mean, it's a great question. The answer is there's actual legislation related to nuclear power plants that require user rates essentially to pay for the decommissioning costs. That is not true for natural gas or oil power plants like Morro Bay Power Plant. Sort of the best we could do, and I think that the city has and committee have done well in the past in getting resources out from the power plant operators when it was operating through the intake leases, using the city facilities to help cool the plant. The city was able to receive revenues and other benefits from those companies, and with the Duke energy agreements and others that came afterwards, being able to get some land from them, including the Triangle lot and the RV camp over by the city's wastewater treatment plant, and easements for the Lila Kaiser Park and some other things. I think the community's done quite well, but this last piece is such a significant cost that there really isn't anything other than, like we've heard before, like incentives to help push for redevelopment. And essentially that's what this MOU is trying to achieve.
Chris, I have had a number of individuals that have asked about the eminent domain process that we entered into. And I think it would be good for you to refresh our memories as to why we had to enter into an eminent domain process, exactly what occurred as a result of that and where we are now?
Sure. So in 2019, over 2 years ago, the city, as it moved along with its phase project for the wharf building, realized that it needed to have these easements on the Vistra property. And the city engaged in negotiations with Vistra for quite some time on purchasing the easements. Consistent with the city has purchased other land, most notably the Tri-W property where the wharf plant's being built right now. The city has purchased other easements from other property owners throughout the city. For various reasons, the negotiations didn't bear any fruit when we talked with Vistra. And to make sure that we stayed on schedule with the state mandated, government mandated deadlines for construction of the wharf plant, the city realized that it needed to pursue eminent domain to make sure that we would get the easements one way or another. And so the council authorized the city attorney's office to file a condemnation action. At this point, the litigation continues, but the court has ruled that the city has prejudgment possession of the easements, meaning that the courts concluded that the city can use the easements now, but we still have a trial upcoming if the litigation doesn't settle to determine the value of the easements and to deal with some other legal issues. Trial's been set for 2022 in spring and also in the summer. There would be 2 different trials. And between when we filed the lawsuit and now, there's been a number of court actions that have taken place. The city has consistently secured everything that it's been trying to get through the court. And, right now the litigation is still active. And if this MOU is approved, then it provides us a roadmap for settling the case.
And is it true basically that we had a valuation done for the easements that placed a number or a value at about $200,000, and Vistra basically claimed that the value was about $6 million? And true statement?
Yes.
Okay, and so the question is it not true that the execution of this MOU has the potential to save the city perhaps anywhere between $3 to $6 million based upon going forward with a court process and having a jury potentially decide that perhaps the value is maybe half of what Vistra claims and much more than what we claim? I'm just trying to get an idea of what the value of that might be to the city.
So to be clear, the city had an appraisal done, a fair market appraisal of the easements, and we've concluded and we believe the easements are worth $200,000. Of course, we're in litigation, and Vistra has claimed that they're worth over $6 million. So there's a disagreement on that. And the way the eminent domain process works is that if the parties can't agree on the value of the easements, then ultimately it goes to a jury, and a jury decides the value. I'm sure, as we all know, short of having a crystal ball, I can't say what value the jury would put on the easements. I can say that the range based upon the documents submitted to the court would be anywhere from $200,000 to $6 million. I want to emphasize we believe they're worth $200,000, but Vistra claims they're worth about $6 million, and a jury would decide that. And then we would need to pay that value that the jury decides.
But under this agreement, those easements would come to us for $1.
Yes.
And the forward-moving process of litigation would stop.
Yes, the litigation would stop, and to be clear, it would stop after escrow closes.
Right.
This agreement provides for an escrow to open up that is a 90-day escrow, and both sides, Vistra and the city, would be putting documents essentially into escrow. For example, we would put $1 into escrow. I'm assuming it would be a check for $1, not literally a dollar bill, but we'd have to put $1 in escrow. Vistra, for example, would put in signed easements to be recorded upon the close of escrow. And there's some other documents and whatnot that need to go into escrow. And both sides have 90 days to do that. I don't think it would take 90 days, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't have to extend escrow if there were some hiccups along the way. And then once escrow closes, then the lawsuit would be dismissed.
Okay. And my last set of questions around an issue has to do with the actual proposed valuation of the property. And my question to you is this: I've had a number of community members approach me and offer that the $1 purchase option or the $1 option that we have in 2033 that exists right now through the Duke agreement has the potential right now to be sold for a significant amount of money. And I won't throw a number out there, but a large sum of money. And I guess I'm trying to ask either you or staff to explain the reality of that and the potential for that. And if you want me to be a little clearer, could we basically put an ad in the newspaper that says we have a $1 option as a city to purchase this property in 2033 and potentially gain a large sum of money that could come to the city immediately for selling the option?
Well, I can't. I can only speculate as to what the future could or couldn't hold if the city did something like that. But I can say that it's a fact that that property has sat there for quite some time, and my understanding is that there's been multiple good faith development proposals where folks have come into the city and either talked to the current landowner or being the current landowner, have tried to figure out a way to get, if you will, make some money off the property, given the condition it's in. And there hasn't been any development to date of any note. So I would assume that if somehow the city were to try to leverage the $1 option, we would be facing a market that would be shaped by the fact that so far there's been no development out there anyways. Basically, I don't know who would want to buy the property. I mean, you never know, but it's a nice property until you look at all the details of the contamination. So I don't know how that would turn out, but I do know it's a fact that to date there has been no development out there for the reasons that have already been articulated. The city manager, perhaps community development director might have some thoughts on that too.
Mr. Collins, Mr. Graham, any comment on that?
I would see if Scott Graham had anything else to say, but I think Chris covered it well.
Yeah, I think, but the only thing I would add to that is the $1 option only takes place if they don't demo the plant. So I don't exactly know how much it's worth, because if Vistra decided to demo the plant at some point, then whoever paid those millions of dollars to the city wouldn't get anything. So
yes,
that seems very speculative to me. So
yeah, Director Graham brings up a really good point. I mean, the obvious underneath all of this is that it's an option pursuant to something doesn't happen between now and 2033. So, any buyer would not only, I would assume, take into account the nature of the land itself and the contamination, but also could be buying something that's worthless because there's over 10 years for the option to be extinguished because the plant's demolished. Now, who knows? I don't know, but those are pretty big factors to deal with, though.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Graham. I appreciate that additional information. I think it's helpful. My last question is perhaps for Mr. Collins or Mr. Graham. There had been a couple of comments that perhaps when we consider this MOU, we should arrive at a value, a penalty value higher than $3 million if by January 1st, 2028, the power plant is not demolished. Any comment on that, that valuation and how we arrived at that, or do you have anything to add?
No, I just think, negotiations, take on a life of their own, and a lot of discussion internally and with Vistra, and feel like it's a sufficient incentive to move them along, and as is their desires for what to do with the remaining portions of the parcel there and their opportunities that it could present them. So I think the incentives are there for the territory.
And my last question for you, Scott, is this: as long as the $1 buyout option continues to exist, where the city can buy out basically the property if there's no demolition by 2033, is it reasonable to assume that any development can occur by any individual party that owns this property?
Of a sufficient size and scale to sort of, address the inherent cost, if you will, for purchasing the property, or if you are the current holder of the land, to overcome those challenges. That $1 creates uncertainty and risk, and it may be at the threshold or level where it wouldn't allow for a pathway forward. And as city attorney, identified, it's sat in its current state for 8 years now, unused. So I think that the history sort of demonstrates that and answers your question.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for letting me go through those litany of questions. I think it was important for the public to get a greater understanding of some of the details behind what we have been discussing and the issues associated with what appears, I think, to be a very complex document, but is actually a very simple document when you look at it, that essentially just has 5 components for us to consider. So with that, that ends council questions. I will bring it back and ask if my esteemed colleague, Councilmember Addis, would like to further summarize or perhaps entertain a motion.
I would like to make a motion, Mayor. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to move that council approve and authorize the mayor to execute the binding memorandum of understanding agreement between the city and Vistra Corp., which purchases necessary wharf easements for $1, settles eminent domain lawsuit, amends encumbrances on development of shuttered Morro Bay Power Plant site, and addresses possible development.
And I'll second that as your co-member of the Vistra subcommittee. Thank you for that. We do have a motion and a second. I do want to provide the opportunity for any summary comments by council members. Looking for hands before we go ahead and call the roll call vote. I see a hand. Oh, there we are. Councilmember Heller, you are adept at using technology. I see a raised hand in the corner. Yes, please, sir.
It's taken me 6 months to learn how to do that, but I appreciate the compliment.
You're welcome.
I just like to, I think this is a very solid agreement, and I'd like to thank Chris Newmeyer and his staff, Mayor Heading, Scott Collins, and everyone who's been involved in the negotiations, which have been going on for some time. And I think in general, they're very favorable to both parties. And I'm happy that we've reached this point where we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Heller. Appreciate that. Any other summary comments by council members?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Councilmember Davis, please.
Yes, I wanted to say first that I think the $1 option served us well during these negotiations because it was a motivator for Vistra to take us seriously and to treat us as an equal partner in negotiation. Even though it seems as if we gave it up, in fact, we used it up. We used it to our advantage to bring them to the table to talk to us. And the second thing is I want to specifically single out and thank Mayor Heading for breaking the logjam. Scott Collins did a beautiful job of opening negotiations with strangers by telephone, people in Texas who had no idea of how things are done in California. But he reached a certain point where it took the man in charge, the mayor, to pick up the phone and speak directly to the CEO of the company and to begin a realistic dialogue that brought us to where we are today. And thank you to Chris and his legal team. We had many closed session meetings where council laid out what we needed to see in the agreement, and Chris brought us everything that we needed to see. So we are an awesome team. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for those kind words, Councilmember Davis, and your, as usual, excellent summary. I do appreciate that. But it was a team effort, I must say. Any further comments?
Sure.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Addis, please. Oh, I see your hand. I'm sorry.
My hand is
I do see it.
hard to see there.
Yeah, it is.
But I would like to concur and just reiterate what both Councilmember Heller and Councilmember Davis have said, to thank the team. There were many, many hours that went into this, and I very much believe what Councilmember Davis said is true, that we have used up the dollar option, that this is a good time for Morro Bay to step into the future, and that we're doing it in the right way with a lot of consensus. I hope when we get to vote that it will be a lot of consensus, and I get the feeling that there is, and I do believe that's because we have spent so much time talking about this, vetting it, thinking about it deeply, bringing many ideas to the table, knowing what the community wants over many, many years of thinking about that property, work that went into this prior to this council, and having that historical knowledge that has also brought us to this point. And I want to thank staff as well for all of their work, and appreciate Vistra for showing up to, a variety of meetings, including presenting to council, the chamber, and as you mentioned, Mayor, when we hosted them as a subcommittee. So I think we're in a good place, and I think a lot of trust has been built, especially amongst our council members, who all seem to, from the comments today, seem to feel that this is the right direction, and I appreciate that.
Thank you for those eloquent words as well. And I'm obviously supporting the motion since I seconded it. It has been a long process, and I'll add my thanks significantly to Mr. Collins, who initially was involved in moving this process forward for many months with one of Vistra's employees, and spent countless hours trying to move this initiative forward. I'm very thankful for our legal team, who provides not only depth, but excellent advice, and has, you'll notice the MOU is simple, but the easements and the other documents in terms of risk management, et cetera, are very complex and complicated, and do protect Morro Bay and provide significant protections for the city. And so, Chris and your team, thank you so much for all of the work that you have done over the last year plus in assisting us legally with making this happen. This is good for Morro Bay. It's time to move forward. I believe that Vistra is not only a capable willing partner, but also is a partner that is committed to advancing the interests of Morro Bay. I believe that in my heart of hearts. I wouldn't say it if I didn't feel it, having been involved directly in the negotiations of this document. And so I'm very pleased that we have a partner now. And not to put down the former owner, but I was also involved in this subcommittee for the last almost 6 years. And literally 4 to 5 venture capital groups came through the city trying to make economic sense of this parcel and future development, and none of them were able to do it. Vistra has proposed a plan. Again, we're not vetting that plan this evening, but I think in the future, with their commitment to the community and their commitment to changing their strategy as an energy company, we are going to benefit greatly as a community from their partnership in the future. So I want to thank Vistra and their staff for working very closely with us on this as well, and would very much look forward to working with them in the future. Lastly, I want to thank my partner in crime, Councilmember Addis, who joined me on the subcommittee and also spent many hours vetting this and working together to try to come to some conclusions with regard to what you see here tonight. So thank you, Councilmember Addis, for stepping up, volunteering, and agreeing to be on the subcommittee as well. With that, if there are no further comments, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Addis?
Yes.
Councilmember Barton?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Heller?
Yes.
And Mayor Heading?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Great. That ends our business for this evening. Thank you all for being here this evening for this special meeting and taking the time to detail this for the community. The next regular meeting of the Morro Bay City Council will be held on June 22nd at 5:30 p.m. via Zoom. Thank you. Good evening. And again, congratulations to all of our high school graduates. Have a safe and pleasant evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
Hi.